Wrestling is a tough business. What other form of entertainment asks its performers to be body slammed, tombstone pile driven, and shining wizarded in the face as part of the job? Nothing, that's what. I'm sorry, that was really aggressive. I'm not sure what came over me. For wrestlers, they just can't give up mid-match if they're hurt because someone has to get pinned. It takes an incredible amount of guts and fortitude to keep working through extreme pain. Some wrestlers are able to excel at this. They take pride in how much punishment they can take and how they can finish matches well past the point that it seems humanly possible. This list is dedicated to the toughest wrestlers in the sport who just didn't know the meaning of quit when they probably should have. I'm Andrew with What Culture, and here are 10 sickening in-ring injuries you won't believe stars wrestled through. Number 10, Bob Holly gets sliced open. You know, there's a really good reason that Sparkplug changed the name to Hardcore. Bob Holly has competed in countless hardcore matches in his career, and even had his neck legitimately broken at the hands of Brock Lesnar. No sane person would question his toughness, and in one Extreme Rules match against Rob Van Dam, he further solidified his legendary badassness. On the crappy WWE version of ECW, Holly superplexed his opponent to the outside of the ring right through a table. Even though Van Dam had the higher fall, it was Holly who sliced his back right open. After 10 more minutes of fighting and bleeding like crazy, Holly started looking a bit woozy from all that blood loss. As soon as the match ended, trainers were on him and he had to be helped to the back. All in all, he required 24 stitches and gained a ton of respect. How do you like him now? Number 9, Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 19. In Brock Lesnar's first WrestleMania match, he nearly died. He was battling Kurt Angle in the main event, with victory just moments away after an F5. Lesnar then began ascending to the top turnbuckle. We had never seen him do this before. Maybe he was just gonna bust out some sort of elbow drop, maybe a bonsai drop, but holy hell, he went for a shooting star press, and then his head slammed right into the canvas. It's not hard to imagine that the move could have ended his career, but he somehow finished the match. It was only another F5 to end things, but he should have been knocked out cold. The look on his face after the match said it all. It was Brock's absolute worst Mania moment ever, until the Goldberg match the following year. Number 8, Triple H tears his quad. There's a lot of things you could say about Triple H. He's full of himself, he takes up too much of the spotlight, he's not half as funny as he thinks he is, he's not a great wrestler anymore. Okay, I'm sorry, that's wrong list here. But one thing he does have going for him is he is downright tough. During a match on Raw in 2001 with Steve Austin against Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit for the tag team titles, Hunter broke up the walls of Jericho on Austin and then fell to the ground. We didn't think anything was wrong, but what we didn't know was that he blew out one of his quads. Despite being in tremendous pain, Hunter soldiered on and took the walls of Jericho on top of the announce table. He then got up once again just so he could go along with the planned finish of accidentally hitting his tag partner with the sledgehammer. He needed to be helped to the back, and it would be the last we would see of him for almost a year. Number 7, Undertaker breaks his orbital bone. Undertaker has suffered a string of bad injuries in his career. Mabel once broke his cheekbone, he was burned by his own pyrotechnic display at Elimination Chamber 2010, and Giant Gonzalez once broke his heart with their WrestleMania 9 match. But it was one remorseless monster who gave Taker his most sickening injury, and of course, I'm talking about Rey Mysterio Jr. During a match on SmackDown, the two were battling for a shot to enter a fatal 4-way match for the World Heavyweight Championship, when late in the match, Mysterio took control and jumped off the ropes right into Taker's face. That monster! Well, on this occasion, Rey landed too hard and Taker's noggin took the brunt of the blow. He looked dazed as blood ran down his face, and that's because his orbital bone had just been broken and he was suffering the effects of a concussion. Somehow he was able to finish the match and put Rey away. That injury, though, kept him on the sideline for months. I think this calls for a mask versus streak match at... oh yeah, never mind. Number 6, John Cena tears his pec. In 2007, Cena was 6 days away from a title defense against Randy Orton, the one and only time they ever fought. But first, he had to get through Mr. Kennedy on Raw. It should have been your safe, typical John Cena match, you know, a 5-knuckle shuffle here, an awkward suplex there, but something didn't quite go right. Perhaps it was Jim Ross who jinxed the face of the company as he announced that Cena can't afford to be injured. Then 30 seconds later, Cena tore his pec muscle right off the bone after a routine arm drag. The injury was so bad that he had to surrender the WWE Championship, and it kept him out of action for months. And just like the Super Cena moniker he's been given, he was able to win the Kennedy match despite only being able to use one arm. Number 5, Mick Foley at the 1999 Royal Rumble. There have been less than 20 I Quit matches in WWE history, and by far the most brutal one was Foley's match at the 1999 Rumble. Unless you mean brutal from a pure quality standpoint, then you'd go with Vince McMahon versus Stephanie McMahon. But who would have guessed that would be The Rock who put a bigger beating on Foley than perhaps even Terry Funk or Vader? Chair shots to the head are banned in WWE right now, but when they did happen, the wrestlers usually put their hands up to absorb the blow. Foley didn't have that luxury at the Rumble, as his hands were handcuffed behind his back. He took 11 unprotected chair shots to the head, which is exactly 11 more than is humane. To make matters worse, he took these in front of his screaming wife and children and a cheering audience. In the end, Foley didn't quit from any of these shots, or even electrocution. It was a previously recorded audio clip that did him in. Number 4, Shawn Michaels at Royal Rumble 98. Just minutes into Undertaker vs. Michaels in a casket match, HBK was back body dropped to the outside of the ring. Unfortunately, he didn't quite make the clearing. Part of his back hit the edge of the casket. It looked like he barely grazed it, but the results were devastating. It gave him 2 herniated discs in his back and crushed another one completely. While most men would have called it a night, and probably a career right there, Michaels wrestled for another 15 minutes. And not only that, but the match was pretty damn good. Very few wrestlers in perfect health could have put on a performance like that. Michaels effectively retired after just one more match, but lucky for fans, the Heartbreak Kid did eventually return a few years later. But even if he hadn't, he had already firmly cemented his legacy that night at the Rumble. Number 3, Steve Austin breaks his neck. At SummerSlam 97, a pile driver proved to be nearly fatal. Owen Hart had performed the move countless times before, but on this occasion, Austin's head was exposed beneath his legs and he was spiked straight into the mat. It was immediately clear that something was wrong. Austin wasn't moving. He was temporarily paralyzed. Owen had to awkwardly kill time until the ref and Austin could figure out what to do. There had to be a finish, and since it was a kiss my ass match, there was no way the Austin character was going to pucker up. What happened next was the absolute weakest roll-up in the history of wrestling. And that's not a knock on Austin, because the fact that he was able to raise his arms was a downright miracle. Amazingly, with a little help, he was even able to walk out of the ring and make it all the way to the back. It was a terrible moment, but it could have been much worse. And when Austin talks about being one tough SOB, it was impossible to argue with him after that match. Number 2, Mick Foley falls from hell. You could probably devote this entire list to nothing but Mick Foley matches, as he's perhaps taken more physical punishment than anyone in wrestling history. For most fans, though, it's his iconic match with The Undertaker at King of the Ring 98 that left a lasting impression in their minds. Foley and The Undertaker decided to settle their feud inside of Hell in a Cell. It was only the 3rd one ever, and due to the brutality involved, it became impossible to top. Wanting to immediately capture the crowd's attention, Foley ascended the cage and dared Undertaker to join him. Unfortunately, that challenge was accepted, and he was soon tossed off the structure, right through the Spanish announce table, and to his death. Or he got back up anyways. The match should have been over. Foley, for some reason, continued to fight and even climbed the cage again. Undertaker himself looked amazed. Foley again came out on the losing side of things as he was chokeslammed through the cage in a bump that was possibly even worse than the first one. Even this wasn't enough to put him away though. He somehow made another comeback even with that tooth lodged in his nose. Mercifully, a tombstone pile driver put Foley away for good, but not before solidifying him as the biggest daredevil in wrestling history. And number 1 is Bruno fractures a vertebrae. On April 26, 1976, Bruno Sammartino took one of the rare losses of his career. Despite fracturing his neck during the match, it was actually blood loss that did him in. He was facing off against Stan Hansen, who was never known for being gentle in the ring, and a sloppy body slam from him fractured Bruno's vertebrae. Instead of just staying down though, he got back up and fought for another 15 minutes, just so he could go along with the planned blood loss finish. After the match, he refused to go to the hospital because he didn't want his parents to worry about him, so he got on a plane that night. Instead of resting up for an entire year, Vince McMahon Sr. put Bruno back to work because Shea Stadium ticket sales were doing lousy. Bruno was back in the ring just 2 months later for a rematch against Hansen. This injury may not be as well known as some of the others on this list, but somehow, being able to wrestle the majority of a match with a broken freaking neck is the most sickening injury a WWE star has ever wrestled through. Well, that is the list. Got any more horrendous injuries you'd like to share? Sound off below. I'm Andrew with What Culture, and you can follow me at Andrew Socek on Twitter. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more great content.